Each year, thousands of parents living apart or divorcing look to the courts for resolution of their disputes. Sometimes they argue over money or property, and sometimes they quarrel about their children. But fights over custody, access, parenting time, and visitation have unintended victims, the children themselves, whose emotional well-being can be harmed by their parents' fight. In this video, Elaine Gordon, a Superior Court judge who presides over custody trials, talks to you about the reality of these disputes and their unfortunate consequences for children.
Hello, my name is Elaine Gordon, and I'm a judge who presides over custody disputes. I'd like to talk to you a little bit today about divorce, custody fights, and what happens to the children whose parents have those fights. I do this in the hope that what I say will inform what you do, and in terms of handling your case, you'll be able to do that in a way which does your children the least amount of harm. You know, one of the problems that we have among couples who are getting divorced is they assume that everybody's fighting about everything. And in fact, if you come to court and you see the hallways all filled with people, you would believe that that's so. But in fact, that's not the case. Over 50% of people who are getting divorced, who have kids, resolve their disputes before they ever step foot in their lawyer's offices. They recognize the custody dispute for what it really is, a personal family matter that parents need to resolve for themselves. Another 20 to 30% of the people will, with a little bit of help from their lawyers or maybe the family relations office, also be able to resolve their cases. Another 10 to 20% of people will go on to mediation, either through our family relations office or through private mediators, and they'll be able to settle their cases. So who does that leave? It leaves only about 10% of couples who are separating or divorcing who have kids who go on with the fight. The next step in a fight for those 10% of people, what they do that nobody else does, is that they enlist their children in their battle. How do they do this? Well, they have a family relations evaluation, or a guardian ad litem is appointed, or an attorney for the minor children, or a psychological evaluation. All of those things have the same result. The children are exposed to the fight, asked to participate in it, and in some ways become foot soldiers in their parents' battle. That step, involving strangers, third parties in the lives of your children, does irrevocable damage to the kids. And I'm going to tell you a little bit later what kind of damage that is. But first of all, you can see that to asking a child, well, what do you think about your mom, and what do you think about your dad, could have some dire consequences in terms of the power inside of the family or putting an undue burden on the children themselves. That's the first and most obvious consequence. The others are even more devastating. Let's think about this divorce from the point of view of a child. I like to try to think of that as actually thinking about it from the height of perhaps a smaller child, not adult-sized, but child-sized, looking at the world from basically behind their parents, because that's what kids do. They rely on their parents to be the wall between them and the outside world. It's a protective wall for them. And what most kids think about their family, when they think about their family at all, is pretty basic. They think, mommy loves daddy, daddy loves mommy, and they love me. And then one day, parents who are separating or divorcing come to their kids and say, well, mommy and daddy don't love each other anymore, but don't worry, honey, we love you. That's not what your kids hear. What your kids hear is, mommy and daddy don't love each other anymore. Uh-oh, they can stop loving me as well. And so for every child in every family that is separating or divorcing, the overwhelming fear for those children becomes the fear of abandonment, the fear that somebody they love will leave them. And what we know is that in divorcing couples, if you recognize that this is the overwhelming theme of your child's life, and you take the steps to ameliorate this problem, your children will do better. What we've learned over the years is that it is not the divorce itself which is the predictor of bad outcomes for kids, but how big the dispute gets, and even worse, whether the dispute becomes one that's over them. The more you fight, the worse your children do. Children need something very basic in a divorce. They need to know that they can move freely back and forth between their parents' homes with love and affection from both, that there'll be some consistency, and that there'll be some respect. You know, nobody's asking that everybody continue to love each other. If you did that, you wouldn't be getting divorced in the first place. And we're not even asking that maybe you even like each other. We're just saying you better pretend that you do. At least as far as the kids are concerned, there should be civility and respect and encouragement in terms of letting the kids love the other parent, even when you're mad. The further you get away from the model of two parents protecting their child in unison, the worse the kids do. Up at Mass General Hospital in Boston, a study was done, and it's now been followed up on, to determine what the effect of a custody fight is on kids. I think that the results were probably not a surprise to people in the mental health professions, but they were shocking results to those of us in the legal system. And I think that they'll be pretty shocking to you as well. One of the things, the most important thing that we learned, is that the emotional profile of a kid whose parents have been fighting over them, that 10% of people who can't resolve their own dispute without involving third parties. Well, what happens to these kids? They come out looking just like the kids in terms of their emotional stability, just like the kids whose parents have their parental rights terminated for abuse and neglect. I think that's pretty shocking to most parents who think that they're fighting for their children and to protect their children, to learn that the fight itself, and just the fight, has such devastating consequences. Let me break down exactly what the consequences are for kids. These results come from that Massachusetts General study. And what the researchers did is they followed the children of what they called high conflict couples. And these are people who involve third parties in the dispute over their kids. And this is what they found. And they found this regardless of the children's age. They found this with little kids, and they found it with older kids. 65% of the kids, 65% of the children in these cases show symptoms of anxiety severe enough that they wind up in a therapist's office. And I can tell you as a judge sitting on custody cases that I don't think I've had a case in which the custody is being fought about where the children are not already either in therapy or about to start it. Well, that's not a normal event in the life of most children. But in the lives of children whose parents fight over them, 65% of them wind up in a therapist's office. You'll see that the increasingly serious disorders are increasing symptoms of anxiety. Remember what I told you about the kids needing their parents to get along. If your parents aren't getting along, the anxiety gets higher for you and the consequences get worse. 56% of the children, 56% of them develop attachment disorder. Now, I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a mental health professional, I can't give you the technical definition of attachment disorder. But I can tell you the layperson's version. If you start out with a child who is fearful of being abandoned by the persons that they love, if you fear that abandonment and it becomes severe enough, as it does for these children, what happens is that they get afraid of being hurt, afraid of being left by the people that they care about, and they won't stick themselves out, or they won't put themselves out in any way to develop interrelationships. So their friendships suffer. They can't establish appropriate friendships. They don't put themselves out there. They get very little, therefore, in return. It spells disaster for their ability to go on and become functioning adults in a healthy emotional relationship. They won't trust anybody for fear of getting hurt and left, and this will create amazingly difficult times for them throughout their own adult lives. 48% of the children wind up with fears and phobias that have never existed before and are not explained by anything other than the fact that the children are increasingly anxious. 44% of the children, including the girls, become physically aggressive. Again, that's anger and anxiety finding a way to express itself physically. 31% of them, and this I think is an amazing statistic given what we know about our sleeping children, 31% of them suffer sleep disorders, which is a completely odd thing to happen to children whose sleep we normally envy. 29% of the kids become withdrawn and uninterested in the activities which interested them before, and that's not surprising because 27% of them are clinically depressed. 24% of them develop oppositional behavior. They become uncontrollable. They throw tantrums that last for hours that exhaust themselves and the entire family. 21% of them, the girls and the boys, become prematurely sexualized, sexually active or knowledgeable before it's appropriate for them to do so. 13% of them are bedwetting into their adolescence, and 10% of them become so psychiatrically impaired that they become disassociative. Now, again, I'm not a psychologist. Disassociative used to be called multiple personality disorder. What it basically means is that where you are living is so emotionally difficult, so hard for you to deal with, that you find an alternative place to be. You can space yourself out and disappear into your other existence. It's a severe psychiatric impairment, and 10% of these children have it. So what you get when you have a custody fight is an atmosphere in which your child, who you think you're helping, is actually being harmed by the fight. I told you earlier that they come out with the psychological profile of children who are abused and neglected. Well, in some sense, and I'm not talking about physical abuse, there is a neglect going on here. It's an emotional neglect, because children need the love of their parents and that stability. And parents who are fighting, who are exposing their children to the fight, are not able to emotionally care for their children. You could say that the fight itself is a sign that the children are not being emotionally cared for. Now, I've been on the bench for almost 20 years, and I was a family lawyer before that. And I have a lot of experience. Most of the other judges who are sitting family also have a lot of experience, and we try to do the best that we can in these kinds of cases. But we are not social workers, we are not miracle workers, we are not psychologists or mental health professionals. What we do for a living is we make decisions. So normally, in a custody fight, we can't work out all of those fine points that you will be able to do in mediation or by talking to each other with the assistance of your attorneys or our family relations officers. In court, pretty much somebody wins and somebody loses. Now, that's not a great outcome for the kids. And in fact, the trial itself can be a very difficult proceeding, and one which will almost guarantee that the relationship with you start, which was not good, will become worse. You know, we all watch TV and we see these television shows in which everything wraps up and the people have great scripts and they're witty or they're intelligent or they're incisive. But in real life, that's not what trial is like. Trial is a very structured, very limiting proceeding. You only get to answer the questions that are posed to you, and then after you've had those structured questions asked and you've given the answer that may sometimes be interrupted by the lawyer claiming that you're not being responsive, the other side gets up and gets to cross-examine you, put words into your mouth, tear your testimony apart. It is an unsatisfying experience. I don't think you'll find anybody anywhere who's ever been on the stand who will tell you that that it was an easy thing to do. So you come off the stand and you say, well, I didn't get across what I wanted to get across. I don't think the judge understands how I feel about my child. I don't think they understand what's going on in my family. Well, that may be so. Any judge who hears your case will, at best, get a thumbnail sketch of your family. We will never know your child the way that you know your child. Custody decisions are best done by parents working cooperatively, not by judges, or as I like to say, strangers in black robes. Let's say you get through the trial, you survive being a witness. Well, what happens then? Well, the judge, somebody like me, is going to evaluate the evidence and make a decision and tell you somebody wins and somebody loses. Well, that's fine, but what's happened? Well, each of you has gotten on the stand and perhaps even called other witnesses who will say terrible things about the other because that's what you have to do in a trial. Nobody who really wanted to parent their child cooperatively with another parent would ever say these things out loud, but yet that's what trial forces you to do. And the trial is over, and what's changed, aside from the fact that one's a winner and one's a loser? Nothing. Nothing has changed. The same dynamic that caused the problem in the first place is still in existence, only it's worse. It's worse because of what you've had to say, it's worse because of the emotional toll a trial has taken on you, and it's worse because one person now feels justified and the other person victimized. Judges are more than willing to make the decisions. It's what we're supposed to do. And we will do it with all of the justice and fairness and kindness that we can muster. But we will still always just be a stranger to your family. As a judge, I can understand why people would come before me and let me make these decisions. But sometimes I wonder, on a human level, why would anybody trust me, just another human being, to tell them the most personal of things, when and where and how and for how long they can see their children? Shouldn't that be a parent's responsibility? Why has it become mine? I'll take it if you give it to me, but I always wonder why somebody wants to give it to me in the first place. As a lawyer, it was a question I always asked of my clients. Why do you want to let this stranger make these decisions for you? And I urge you, as you're thinking about your case, to ask yourself that question. Why would you want a stranger to make these decisions that affect the most precious things in your life, your kids? Throughout the system, you have lots of opportunities to settle your case, with the assistance of our family relations officers, with the assistance of your lawyers, with the assistance of other private professionals who you can hire. Working on the causes for the dispute, trying to get it settled, is the only way in which the dynamic between two people who are not getting along will change. And that is what actually settles custody disputes. The parents recognizing their responsibility to first take care of their kids and then doing whatever it takes to do that. You know, people who are married, intact, and happy don't necessarily agree about what they're going to do for their children. But they learn to compromise and to get along. And what we all learn as parents is that the first rule of parenting is that we sacrifice. You know, the first custody dispute that we know of comes from a story in the Bible in which Solomon was faced with two women who claimed to both be the mother of a baby. And Solomon, who was supposed to be a wise king, stood out of his throne and raised his sword over his head and said, well, I can solve this problem. I will cleave the baby in two. At which point, one of the women threw herself over the child to take the blow rather than let the child be harmed. And Solomon said, now I know who the real mother is. What I'm urging you to do is whatever may be driving your dispute, be it anger, resentment, vindictiveness, self-righteousness, pride, whatever. I'm asking you to put it aside for the benefit of your children and to give it a shot. Try to get the case settled. Try to use the facilities available through the court or those which your counsel can arrange for you, and try to settle your cases. For the kids, living through a custody fight is like living in a war zone. Nothing good of it comes for them. I promise you that if you don't like each other now, if you have a custody dispute, you're not going to like each other even more later. Those of us who do this for a living, lawyers, judges, we can tell you that the outcome for kids is terrible, and we can give you all of this advice. But it's only by looking at yourselves and trying to figure out what you can do differently that can stop the dispute or resolve the dispute that's ongoing. I'd like to tell you a story before I close, and it's a story that I tell often to the litigants in my courtroom. It's a story about two different families. In each of these families, there's a divorce. One of them has a son, and one of them has a daughter. At the time of the divorce, the son, his parents resolve their issues. They come up with a custody, a parenting plan, and, they don't like each other all that much, but they have a good working relationship. They've learned to respect each other as the other person's parent. They've learned to keep their mouths shut about a lot of the things that bother them, and they get along well enough. The other little girl, whose parents have a fight, her parents have a fight over her. They have a custody dispute, and one of them wins and one of them loses. When this happens, each of the kids is about 12 years old. And about 13 years later, when they're about 25, the boy and the girl meet, and they're going to get married. And for the boy, the wedding's not a problem. But for the girl, it's a planning nightmare. Her first question is, can she invite both of her parents to the wedding, because they have not spoken a civil word to each other since the divorce. Each time they've been in the same room, they've gotten into an argument. They have humiliated her and made her life difficult at recitals, soccer games, graduations, parties. She's concerned that if they're both there, her wedding will be ruined. Once she figures out that perhaps she can invite them and still have other members of the family watch them, she then has to figure out whether she can have anybody walk her down the aisle, because if she has her dad walk her down the aisle, her mother will tackle him, no doubt. So she chooses to walk down the aisle by herself. On the night of the wedding, after the ceremony, there are completely different things going on both sides of the room. On the groom's side, you have parents and step-parents and step-grandparents and aunts and uncles, and you can't tell who's married to who and who's divorced from who, because they're all just happy, drinking wine, enjoying themselves, and celebrating the good fortune of their son. On the other side of the room, the bride's parents are at opposite ends of the hall, and there are designated watchers among the aunts and the uncles, making sure that they stay separate and apart, and the bride, of course, is minding all of the minders. She cannot take a picture with both her parents in it, so there's no wedding picture of the three of them. What's supposed to be the happiest and the best day of her life has been ruined, another casualty of her parents' custody dispute. You have the opportunity, no matter what stage your case is at, you have the opportunity to choose which of those families do you want to be. We know which one helps the kids, and I'm asking you to think about this. Absent abuse or neglect of the children, is there really any reason important enough to have a custody dispute to sacrifice your children's emotional health, emotional well-being, and stability to your fight? Like I said, you get to pick which family you want to be. One of them's a lot happier than the other. I wish you the best of luck in your choice.